We're talking about discrimination. Now, this is a really big topic, and I can only talk about very limited parts of it. But let's talk about what is discrimination. If you're in Queensland, it's more likely than not that discrimination is going to fall under the Anti-Discrimination Act of Queensland. Now, there is a federal act, the Anti-Discrimination Act of Commonwealth, but let's stick with some of the more local acts, like the Anti-Discrimination Act of Queensland. Discrimination is found in the Anti-Discrimination Act, and we think about it as discrimination attributes. If you fit into one of the attributes, then it is a possibility that you have a discrimination claim against whomever discriminated against you. Discrimination attributes, there are quite a few of them. So, for instance, it might be because of family responsibility, it could be because of your race, it could be because of your pregnancy, it could be because of you have an illness or injury, and that falls under impairment. So you can see there's a broad range of discriminating attributes. Now, have you been discriminated against? There are some really easy ones to just figure out whether you've been discriminated against. For instance, you might be refused entry into a restaurant because of your race or because of your religion. Okay, so when we think about discrimination in the workplace, we think about whether you as an employee are discriminated against either directly or indirectly. Direct discrimination could be something really offensive, like some sort of racial slur or some sort of slur because of your religion, or it could be indirect. For instance, a little bit more like there is a policy that says only people of a particular height can have this job, and it's a completely arbitrary rule. Now, when we think about height, we think about whether you're from a cultural background that's shorter than the social norm of the workplace, and that because you are of a shorter height, because of your culture, you are not going to be able to get that job. You could be female and the height is over the height of, say, an average female, so you are automatically going to be at a disadvantage there. So that's an indirect discrimination issue. When we think about whether you have been discriminated against, so we think about the direct and indirect discrimination, we also think about who's discriminating against you. If it's indirect, then it's probably something like the company and the company policy. If it's direct discrimination, it's probably something like there's some sort of racial slur, or you're not invited to the Christmas party because you you don't drink alcohol for a religious or cultural reason, or you are another reason could be because you have a physical disability. You're not invited to certain events because there are stairs, for instance. So we need to think about cultural sensitivity. We need to think about sensitivity in around whether you've got a disability or not, whether you've got a physical or psychological or mental disability, and that comes under impairment. Another question is, if you're being discriminated against, how long do you have to make a complaint? Now, I'm not talking about making a complaint in the workplace and making an internal complaint through the workplace policies, or just complaining to your boss about having someone give you a racial slur, for instance. I'm talking about filing an application, for instance, with the Queensland Human Rights Commission under the Anti-Discrimination Act. Now, the Queensland Anti-Discrimination Act states that you've got 1 year from the discriminating event occurring to file an anti-discrimination application. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule, but it is up to the Commission to extend that time. Now, they might extend that time for a number of reasons. It could take an actual hearing to extend that time as well. So it becomes far more complicated if you're out at the time. Now, discrimination claims, unlike unfair dismissal or general protection claims in the Fair Work Commission, the thing that the Human Rights Commission of Queensland consider it as a threshold question first. So what they do is they look at whether you have a prima facie case on the face of it. do you have, has direct or indirect discrimination occurred? Now, because of that extra complication, we would absolutely recommend that you seek assistance when you file that claim in relating to discrimination, because there is that first threshold question. It can be quite stressful if the Commission come back to you and say you haven't met the threshold, but you feel genuinely you have. We would encourage you to seek additional assistance when filing that application. Now, what happens once you file an application? Well, first of all, like I said, the Commission will consider it as a threshold question whether you have a prima facie case. Whether on the face of it you have met those criteria of either direct or indirect discrimination. Just on the papers general, which means that they will look at your application and they will make a decision on that. The next thing that happens is they will notify you they've been successful, and they will more than likely set down a conciliation time. Now, conciliation is normally done face to face. There is possibilities that it's done over the telephone, and that could be for a number of reasons. The conciliation takes 3 hours, and it is quite a stressful process, and we would recommend that you either bring a support person or you bring somebody to represent you during that time. Now, do I file in a state or federal jurisdiction? That is a really big question. First of all, you need to consider what is it that you feel you've been discriminated against and how. So that might fall, for instance, under the human rights charter that Australia has signed with other countries, and if that's the case, it might be a federal jurisdiction. If it is a employment discrimination, then it is more than likely going to fall under the state jurisdiction. It could fall under the federal, but we would certainly be encouraging you to look at getting some assistance and some advice as to whether you should file in the federal jurisdiction before you do that. A good place to start is to give the Human Rights Commission of your state or territory a call first. They won't be able to provide you legal advice, but they should be able to direct you to somewhere where you're going to be able to get that legal advice. And of course, you can always give us a call. We will certainly be able to assist you on that. Thank you for watching.